Hi friends! So I received several requests for some basic lettering tutorials. So I'm going to walk you through my process for drawing simple sans serif letters. So the first thing I like to do is to bring up my guides. So you go here to the little tool icon, click Canvas and Drawing Guide. And under Edit Drawing Guide, you can change the color of your guides. You can change the size of the guide. I like mine to be about there, and you can change the opacity. I like mine in the 35–40% range because that way it doesn't get too distracting. I prefer to sketch with a pencil. There are several pencil options that come with Procreate. I prefer the HB pencil, and I usually keep my brush size all the way up to 100%. Now the first thing I like to do is a quick skeleton sketch. Now this isn't meant to be pretty, it really is just to map out where your letter forms are going to fall, what it's going to say. Since we're doing a sans serif style, I'm just going to letter the words sans serif. This is going to be a fairly condensed style, so meaning that the letters are going to be relatively skinny. And I have a general idea of where my letter forms are going to fall. Now the next thing I like to do is draw an additional set of guides to help me ensure that all of the letter forms within each word are consistent. So I'll add a new layer, and I like to do a really bright color, and I use the technical pen for this usually. And I'm just going to draw a straight line at the top and the bottom of my word. And by the way, if you're not familiar with how to do this in Procreate, if you draw a line, see how wiggly that is? If you just draw and hold, it will snap to a straight line, which is very helpful. So I use the pink guides to help me keep my letter heights consistent, and the canvas guide helps me to position the artwork on the page. So I've got my skeleton sketch, and now it's time to add a little meat to these bones. Now the trick that I've been using for this is to use a wide brush. There are several wide brushes that you can use under the painting section of the brush library. I personally like the flat brush. Now, just so you know, it is pressure sensitive, so it will change depending on how much pressure you apply. If that bothers you though, you can use the nickel roll, which just has a little more texture to it, but it is a nice wide flat brush. What I'll do is I'll set the width that's too wide. So I'm going to just reduce my size here. I've got the size that I want. And what I'll do is just go over my skeleton sketch with the wide brush. I usually like to start with simple downstroke. Again, this is really rough and by no means the final. All I'm trying to do here is get a rough idea of what the width of each of my letters will be. Now I'm going to show you my trick for drawing S's. And I learned this trick from both Lauren Holm and Mai de Leon. So first what I do is I draw an oval. Once I've drawn my oval, I want to draw a diagonal line a little bit higher than the center point of that oval. So I'll draw my diagonal line here. And then I'll go in and just connect that diagonal line to the rest of my oval. Now this is going to be really rough at first, and we'll clean it up when we start sketching in earnest. Then I'll just go and erase the areas of the oval that I don't need. And I'll show you that again with this S. Draw my oval. By the way, this is one of the reasons why I like the pressure sensitivity of the flat brush, because I can make that oval super light, then I can go in with more pressure and draw the rest of the S. So there we have my second rough sketch. Now it's time to move on to finalizing the sketch. So I'm going to go back to my HB pencil. First, I'm going to reduce the opacity of that second sketch, and then I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to do my pencil sketch on top of this. Now this part of the sketching phase is going to be pretty easy because thanks to that last exercise, I know that all of my strokes are going to have the same width. So this part of the sketching process is going to be about basically cleaning up these letter forms, making sure that everything looks nice and crisp. Now here's a little tip with the S. You want to make sure that this part of the S comes out a little bit more than the top part of the S. So if I were to draw a straight line here, you'd see that this is a little further out than this. That's just going to give you more balance, otherwise it'll look like your S is tipping over this way. It's one of those optical illusions. Another optical illusion with the A, and really most letters that have a crossbar, usually will want to make the crossbar a tiny bit thinner than the rest of the strokes. Again, it's an optical illusion because if it's the same width as the other strokes, it will appear too fat. So even though my guide here shows me that it should be this wide, I'm going to cheat it and come in just a tiny bit. Here's another visual trick that you'll want to remember is the middle crossbar of an E should be slightly shorter than the top and the bottom bars. So what I usually do is I just draw a straight line all the way down the E and make sure that this center crossbar is shorter. That rule that we had for the E with the middle crossbar being a little shorter, that also holds true for the F. So now I'm going to remove that sketch layer that I created. And actually I'm going to remove my guide as well. And I can see here that there are a couple inconsistencies with spacing. So That's the other important part of lettering, is not only do you want to have consistency with your stroke, you want consistency with your spacing as well. So this S needs to be a little closer to the A. So I'm just going to select that. Make sure that I'm on uniform and magnetics and just shift that over slightly. And you'll notice here that technically the R and the I are closer together than the I and the F. There's less space here than there is here. But the trick with a letter like R is visually it looks like there's more space up here because of the curve of the R. So although technically this I is a little closer to the R than it is to the F, I'm going to leave it there because visually if I shift it over to the right, then it's going to appear as though there's too much space up here. Since I've taken my time during the sketching process to make sure that everything is exactly how I want it, that means that the inking process can go much more smoothly. And since we're working digitally, I actually have a way that I speed that process up even more. First, I'm going to turn my guides back on, and again, I'm going to reduce the opacity, add a new layer. For inking my lettering, I like to use the technical pen. And basically, it's just about tracing yet again. Now I mentioned that there's a shortcut I like to take. Basically, for all of the downstrokes, what I'll do is I'll draw it once. And I'll just duplicate it so I don't have to go through that process again. So what I typically will do is see how many downstrokes I have. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just going to draw one of them and duplicate it 3 times so I can get basically a head start on the rest of these letter forms. So there's one. And then I can finish up. And I've saved myself a few minutes of inking time. And there we go. So now I'm just going to turn off my guides and my sketch. And this isn't centered on my canvas, so I'm just going to select the top word. Make sure it's centered. This is my center point. And I'll also make sure this is centered. And And there we have super clean and simple sans serif lettering.